When the Sony ZV-E1 came out a couple of months ago, Sony said in the summer 4K 120 is coming. And everybody was like, yeah, sure, it's coming. This camera does get hot, 4K 120 will melt it. Today, friends, 4K 120 has arrived for the Sony ZV-E1 and an extra frame rate that I don't think anybody knew was coming. And it is insanely good. However, to even get this stuff onto the camera, there's something that's not a firmware update. It's a thing called a license file, which I've never really experienced at this level before, but let's dive in, and this is really simple to do. Essentially what you need to do is get this license file from Sony on their website. I've left a link in the description. You sign in with your Sony Creator Cloud ID thing, or you can just sign in without a download. Regardless, you are going to need the serial number for your Sony ZV-E1, which you can find on the bottom of the camera, or you can find it in the system settings within the camera with a couple of clicks. So if you follow what's on screen here, you'll see exactly where you need to go. Then once you put in your serial number here, you get the link to download the file. So tap the box, click the box, download the file, and dump it onto the memory card. Now, whatever memory card you're using in the Sony ZV-1, make sure it's at the very top level. Don't go into the Sony folder, any of the folders. It needs to be on the top level. And once you've got that done, stick the memory card into your camera and then turn on your Sony ZV-E1. The next step here, and this couldn't really be any easier, follow what it says on screen, select OK, and that's it. 4K 120 is now on the Sony ZV-E1, and that extra frame rate that I haven't spoken anything about yet, but it blew me away. So to check that you've got the 4K 120 recording option, again, you jump into the system settings here that you see on screen, and you're going to see 4K 120 recording. Then you're good to go. So there is a couple of limitations. From what I can see, there's no time limit limitation according to Sony, but you do lose clear image zoom, that kind of thing, and the fact that it won't focus anymore in clear image zoom, which is not really a big loss in my book. It always has to be in the compressed recording mode, so you won't get all intra recording on the 4K 120, which for every case I think is really, really fine. So there's no real limitations from what I can see just so far. This thing is literally just gone online. Let's take a look at the footage. This is 4K 120. So we've got my son here with a football, which is all fine and dandy, and it's like, okay, what about if we could up the stakes here in 4K 120 and let's get a balloon filled with water. Now, the one good thing about 4K 120, and this is one of the reasons you should be shooting in 4K 120 if you're doing a lot of slow-mo stuff, is you can crop in quite a bit without losing any quality. As we can see here, this looks insane. And that's more or less on the 4K 120 side. Now, friends, here's the best that I've saved until last. You can shoot 240 frames per second. On this camera, you can shoot that. Oh, crazy, right? So here's the thing, there is no real limitations. It's not 4K, it is 1080, but if you've used 1080 120 on any of the Sony cameras, even the Sony ZV-1, you'll know it's incredibly clean. So I have really high hopes for this 240 frames per second, which is only available in the S&Q mode. And when you are in the S&Q mode, make sure you are actually in the movie S&Q mode, which you can see here on screen by pressing menu, and you can sort that out. So just make sure that, otherwise it'll start taking a time lapse, which is no good to anybody. And then this is what 1080, 240 frames per second looks like. It is crazy good, and it is completely clean and completely usable. Now, first couple of thoughts here. Sony ZV-E1 didn't really get warm. All of the stuff was shot outside. The battery did go down quite a bit quicker on the 4K 120, but keep in mind, the majority of cameras, from GoPros to this to DJI stuff to whatever, anything that's shooting 4K 120, it's a huge power draw. So these things, the battery does go down quite quick. So for example, I shot, some of the stuff that I shot here, there's about 28% left in the battery, and that was gone roughly after about 15-20 minutes. But that was constant 4K 120. There's no heat warning signs on this so far. Didn't feel warm, and same for the 1080 to 40. So now the Sony ZV-1 has really leveled up. This thing is without doubt an absolute monster of a camera with these features enabled. It's crazy. And the fact that you can do this in just a couple of seconds is bonkers. It's just so easy to do this. So if you've got the Sony ZV-E1, get that license file and boom, 4K 120 and 240 frames per second. I cannot wait to dig into this a little bit more. And if you want to learn more about slow motion settings on the Sony ZV-E1, make sure you subscribe, because you can't just dump in any old settings here. There's very specific settings that you need to get the best looking slow motion footage. That's going to be in one of my next videos. If you subscribe, hit the notification bell, you will find out when that is going to happen.